Well, hello and welcome to Soul GPS. This is Ava, and today we're coming to you from beautiful Sedona, Arizona, and it is my absolute honor to introduce to you Kaleah Laroche, who is a coach who's been specializing in narcissistic abuse for over a decade now. She is also someone who's explored many talents. She's an exceptional writer, a singer, just a woman who, as we just said, follows what she likes, does what she likes, which I think is a great way to live. And the two of us connected a while back. I found Kaleah online looking for some answers for some of my own work that I've been struggling with, especially with respect to my family of origin and processing some old wounds and so on. And she's been absolutely instrumental in helping me to with navigating through some of these very tricky, treacherous territories. So today I really wanted to bring to you this gift of a woman, and we will have a bit of a conversation and share with you some of the things that we have incorporated and discovered in the process of healing our own wounds and integrating different areas of our childhood that maybe we have, as you so beautifully say, tried to eliminate, or the word that you used was amputate.
Oh, amputate, yes.
Amputating negativity and amputating the wounds. So instead of amputating them, it's more about embracing,
integrating, loving.
Right.
Yes.
Yes. So this is something we would like to discuss today. So Kaleah, share with us, please. How did you come to discover that one of these very integrative, feels like, areas of healing is embracing our core wounds, is understanding where they came from and what they are, which essentially they're lies, right? That's the amazing thing about a lot of these wounds, is that we have learned to understand the way that other people have interpreted our reality as something that is true, which is why it hurts to us, because it really isn't true. It's a lie.
Right. The interpretation is a lie. The wounds are real, but the things we tell ourselves about the wounds are the lie.
Right.
And how I got into this work is just like I talk to people about narcissistic abuse. I've been there. I've done my work.
Right.
I've done a lot of my work. I'm still doing my work.
Right.
So it's a process.
Definitely.
And I've been doing this work for a very long time. I started early. I started when I was 19 years old with a serious life-threatening eating disorder.
Oh, wow.
So I was in therapy for years to overcome that. It was life-threatening. If I had not been in therapy at 19, I wouldn't be here today.
Oh, wow.
So it was serious.
Wow.
And so
what did you discover through that?
Well, I discovered a lot about the family to begin with, because, all of our core wounds come from the family dynamic, and it's not really about blaming any family member, but it comes from the family dynamic. It comes from the role that we play. It comes from the messages that we receive. It comes from how we interpret the messages. And so I was in the family. I was the sensitive one.
Right.
I was the emotional one. I was the artistic one, and that kind of all falls into, a lot of people will identify with this. That artistic, sensitive, emotional person is often the scapegoat in the family. It's often the one that she's got the problem. So when I went into therapy for my eating disorder, my whole family was brought into therapy the first day. They only were there the first day, but they were all brought in. And they were all asked, the therapist went around the circle with all my family members, why are you here? Why do you think you're here today? And everybody pointed the finger at me because she has a problem.
Wow.
So I was always the one with the problem.
Wow, that's so revealing.
So my life was about figuring out what my problem was. It became figuring out what my problem was. First it was curing my eating disorder, because that was a problem. And then problems continued to reveal themselves. So it was always about solving the problems in myself. And, somewhere along the line, it was really after I discovered narcissistic abuse, which I discovered that through being in narcissistic relationships,
Many of us do.
As many of us do, that, there's nothing like a narcissistic relationship to activate those core wounds, to bring them to the surface, to show us what we're sitting on.
Exactly.
And I thought I had dealt with it, being in therapy for 2 years from a eating disorder. I thought I had dealt with it with the other therapy that I did when things came up for me, but there was nothing that devastated me more than that first narcissistic relationship.
Yes.
And it just brought it all to the surface, things that I didn't deal with, that I hadn't dealt with when I was dealing with my eating disorder. So it started a whole new journey of working, and that was a journey of working on a deep emotional level, working with this really deep pain. Pain unlike anything that I'd ever been aware of. And what I discovered is that this pain isn't new. We've always had it.
Yeah.
As little kids, we feel that pain.
Yes, we do.
But it goes underground because kids can't handle it. They don't know how to handle that level of pain. So they learn to dissociate. They learn to cut off from that pain. And it goes underground into the subconscious.
Right.
Into the shadow.
Right.
And then when we, believe it or not, when we get stronger, it gets to come out. It comes out for us to deal with. We don't think we're stronger at the time.
That is huge. I love what you just said. That is huge, because so many people that I talk to, and so many people who write to me, and I'm sure who write to you as well, they feel like, I don't know how to deal with it. I'm dying. But the truth of the matter is that everything you have done in your life up to this point prepared you to handle it.
Yeah, it did.
Yeah.
It prepared you to handle it. So there comes a time in your life where my show's called Pandora's Box. Pandora's Box.
We'll link it down below so you can check it out. Phenomenal.
Pandora's Box gets opened.
Right.
And inside Pandora's Box is everything that we've suppressed our entire life, and possibly even beyond, past lives, if we want to get into that. But everything comes out of the closet. It all comes out of that box. And the thing about Pandora's Box, and the reason I love it and chose that as the name of my show, is once that box is opened, you can't close it again. You can't unlearn what you've learned. You can't unknow what you know.
You can't unsee what you see.
Yeah. So once it comes out, it's like you have to deal with it.
Right.
Or, and what I found too is that all the addictions, we all have addictions. We all have ways that we avoid, whether it's, food, alcohol, drugs, or even more healthy things like working out, running, working, workaholism, which we give kudos to. We give kudos to being a exercise addict. We give kudos to being a workaholic. So there's some things you get rewarded for having as an addiction, and other things you don't get so rewarded.
The society that we live in, right? It definitely reinforces some of those behaviors. We feel like they're right, but they're actually not necessarily healthy at all.
No,
right?
No, they're not. So we use these, but the thing is what I have found. Okay, I'm going to get into the deep part of it right now.
Please.
Dealing with our core wounds is a type of spiritual journey. And when the door is opened to start on that path of facing and healing our core wounds, our addictions don't work for us anymore.
That is so true.
So we have all these addictions that I was talking about. They just don't do the trick anymore. So you can, if you're a drinker, you can drink till the cows come home. You're not going to drink away the pain. You can eat away the pain. It's not going to work. All those things that you've previously done, your relationships. You can't get involved in those relationships anymore. A lot of people have a string of one narcissistic relationship after another.
Correct.
and you can't medicate anymore. It doesn't work because the call has come, and now it's time to answer it.
Now is the time.
You have to do the work. So we have to look at it as a wake-up call. It's time.
Absolutely. So it is an opportunity to get to know yourself, an opportunity to transcend that. Because here's another thing that I am discovering right now. I'm still also very much deep in the trenches of the journey. But as we spoke earlier today, you had said something to me that just feels so liberating. And that is that there is a place that we can arrive at when we feel self-actualized, when we find peace, where these things no longer matter, where we can actually really truly blossom into who we were meant to be on this planet. So this suffering can end. It's not that it's going to have to go on and you're going to have to constantly doing and churning and something. No, you're at the point in your life where it's just so, the tension is so intense that now is the time to, you can't turn away from it.
Right.
So what would you recommend, Kaleah, as a good starting point for doing this work on self-healing? And I know we're speaking, it's different for everyone, but what was it for you? What were some of the pivotal moments in terms of focusing on areas within yourself that really helped to get the most traction?
Well, the one thing that I recommend that everybody understand when you start working with core wounds is that you can't run from your pain. The only way out is through. And so there is going to be a tendency to want to get out of pain, to find a way out of pain. And what I discovered is there really is no way out but to feel it. So the first thing you need to do is set up an environment that is safe.
Beautiful.
In your home, in your life, in which you can sit with what's coming up, as uncomfortable, as painful as it is, and make friends with pain. Because we live in a society where pain is not, it's really not allowed. In many ways, we just don't,
little, right?
Yeah. We don't do pain.
Right.
We do something else, but we do not do pain. Pain is not okay. If you're feeling pain, you often get shamed for feeling pain, for having feelings. You shouldn't feel that way. Why do you feel that way?
Exactly.
And so we end up associating so much negativity with pain. And of course, pain doesn't feel good either. So we want to avoid it. So this whole idea of actually making friends with your pain and being able to sit with it is foreign. It doesn't feel right at first. It's like, how do I get out? And that's one thing when people come to me, how do I get out of pain? I want out. How do I get out? And, I try to explain that it's not about getting out. It's about walking through. It's about learning the tools to be able to be with your pain. So I do have tools that I teach on how do you be with your pain. But first and foremost, I'll tell you, if you're dealing with this, it doesn't feel good.
Right.
Does not feel good. So you have to get used to not feeling good for a while. And it will be a while. It's not a quick process. So when we decide we're going to embark on this journey, it can take years.
Right.
I don't know about you, but for me, it was years.
Yeah. For me, I would say that it was years of feeling the pain, but without knowing what it was. And I think that was really disempowering because I was running in circles. I kept slipping up. I kept making the same mistake. And it wasn't until I learned about narcissistic abuse and began to reach out and work with people, work with coaches like yourself as well, that I was starting to really make a lot of progress. But naming it and knowing what it was and understanding also that before I knew what it wasn't my fault. Before I knew what it was, I was really, as much as I hate to say this word, I was a victim of my circumstance. And again, without blaming our parents, they did whatever they could. They were the victims of their own circumstance. And it just kind of snowballs like that, right?
Yes.
But the moment I found out what it was and I was able to look at my life, not from the standpoint of like a fantasy, like, oh, because I wanted my life to be this or that. That was another really painful thing, was grieving of the fantasy not being real. Not just of who other people were to me, but also who I was to them. And realizing that was an illusion. that reality is different, and it was about facing reality. Once I faced reality and I said, okay, I'm going to own it. I'm going to own that what happened to me had a purpose, had a reason, and it was, as a friend of mine says, not so much that it happened to me, it happened for me. It was a gift. Mm-hmm. That's when the game began to change, and that's when I had to roll up my sleeves and really get to work. And what helped me, because I feel like that it started for me last October, and it's been, not last October, the October before, so it's been just over a year. And looking back at the pain that I had to deal with for majority of my life, or where I am today, to me the progress seemed pretty fast. But what I think did it is the whole idea of neuroplasticity and exposing myself to doing things very differently in almost, I would say, again, maybe not the right word, but that's the one word that comes, is almost like a violent way. I ripped myself from what I knew, and I set myself on a journey without having too much financial security, without knowing what I was doing, where I was going. I just took my backpack and actually recorded a bunch of videos while I was on that journey. That's when I started.
Beautiful.
And I just dove into it, and I shared it with people. And by speaking out about it and having very new experiences, putting myself in new environments, I think environment is key. Like you said, create an environment of safety. That's what allowed me to put things in perspective. Because when we are still with the same people, still surrounded by the same energy, mm-hmm. it's difficult to see the truth and what's been going on because we're in it.
Right.
I found that when I moved away, physically, literally moved mm-hmm. away, then the mosaic began to click into place. And I was like, oh, and it's almost, I had these spontaneous moments of realization. And I was like, I gotta grab a camera and share it right now.
Yeah.
That's what it was for me. But of course, not everyone is going to have that ability to do that and to just like leave everything and travel. But that's what's been helpful for me. But the process is continuing for sure. Going deeper, there are more layers, learning to have healthy relationships also, whole new thing. And really dialoguing with those wounds almost on a daily basis. Because like you said, they don't really go away. They fizzle out, but they also can become teachers. I feel like we can turn, and I think Oprah said that, turning wounds into wisdom. And that's what I'm after.
Right, absolutely. And there's two things to think about when you think about our core wounds. So there's core wounds and there is pain. Mm-hmm. Now, our core wounds are those initial wounds that we have that basically create pain for us. So like we talked about at the beginning, the things we tell ourselves about it. A mm-hmm. core wound can be, there's something wrong with me. I'm not good enough. I'll never measure up. So there's a wound that basically tells us that it's a belief. So you could call a core wound also a core belief. Right. That we develop these beliefs that are reinforced as children, whether it's in our family of origin, on the playground, in our social groups as kids. We develop these beliefs about ourselves. And the typical core wound is I'm not enough. That is probably the top one. Mm-hmm. I'm not enough. There's mm-hmm. something wrong with me. Mm-hmm. That can also be called core shame, because core shame is that feeling that there is something inherently wrong with me. There's something bad in me. I'm a bad seed. Mm-hmm. That's shame. Mm-hmm. That's different than guilt, which is I did something wrong. I made a mistake. The core wound is I am a mistake. Mm-hmm. So we have this thing called the core wound, and we feed that by, for one, we draw into our lives these circumstances that reinforce that core wound belief.
Right.
So mm-hmm. we have a relationship. Somebody doesn't treat us good. We are abused. We're left. Whatever it is that happens, we're going to interpret that as that happened because there's something wrong with me. I'm not enough. I'm not good enough. I'm not lovable. Right. Whatever it is that we're telling ourselves. Right. So we reinforce that belief by basically telling ourselves, by having this almost unconscious dialogue, because until we make it conscious, it's something that we're doing unconsciously.
Right.
So we interpret the circumstances of our life, no matter what it is. Somebody could cut us off in traffic. Well, they cut me off in traffic because I'm not good enough. There's something wrong with me. Everybody cuts me off, you know? So we have a way of just interpreting life to reinforce our core wounds. And so the first thing we have to do is bring awareness in, and bring awareness that my core wound is, I don't feel like I'm good enough. I don't feel like I'm enough. Mm-hmm. We're just going to use that as the example because it's a big one.
Right.
And so catching that as your core wound, realizing, bringing awareness to it. I realize now that I have this core wound that I'm not good enough. And so life has been reflecting to me this wound my entire life. It's been showing me that I'm not good enough by bringing people into my life that show me that I'm not good enough, or circumstances that I interpret as meaning that I'm not good enough. And when I tell myself that I'm not good enough over and over and over, what happens is that pain gets triggered. Mm-hmm. So,
and it also piles, right?
Yeah.
It gets bigger over the years. In the dark recesses of the subconscious mind, it keeps growing.
Right, because when I tell myself I'm not good enough, it hurts. Mm-hmm. It's painful.
Right.
So if I start interpreting all the life events that happen as meaning I'm not good enough, then basically I'm causing my own pain. So there's the original pain, there's the original wound, there's everything we've sat on, there's everything we've suppressed in our life, but there's also everything that we're telling ourselves that actually keeps that pain alive.
Right.
So we can do some of our work and sit with some of our pain and release some of our pain, but if we keep telling ourselves this story, then we keep the pain alive.
And these circumstances can be interpreted differently.
Right.
So it's also, in a way, we reinforce this belief, and this is subconscious because no one who's aware of this would do that. That's why awareness is so powerful here. As we look for those things, right? It's and part of it, we draw it to us, but it's also like, you know, you buy a red Mustang and suddenly you see red Mustangs everywhere. Right. You feel the pain, so you are receptive to the very painful things that are happening to you because they really light up for you. Why do they light up? Because that's where the work is at. Right. Because that's what's calling your attention to it until you have the moment where the clouds clear and you see it, you see that. And oftentimes it's good to have somebody pointing at you, someone who's been there, who's done it, because it's very difficult to discover, because our minds kind of play tricks on us in that way, where we just get sort of caught up in this matrix of interpretation we're used to since we're little. Right. We're very masterful at hiding from ourselves. So our enlightenment, you know, the word enlightenment to me means bringing what is hidden to light. Right. You know, we often see enlightenment as this big spiritual achievement, but it's really levitating or something.
Right. It's really more about bringing what is hidden to light, bringing what is in the shadow, which is just basically the places within us that are hidden. That's what the shadow is. Bringing that to light. The more we become aware of things, the less power they have in our lives. If we walk through life completely unaware, being run by our wounds, then we just become the wounded reactors in our life. We're always reacting to the different circumstances and people that come into our lives. And we get into both blaming others and self-blame. Right. All the time. Our whole life becomes about blaming others and blaming ourselves.
So these are the only poles that we circle around.
Right.
And but there's nothing beyond that, right? But there is a way to get beyond that.
Absolutely. Responsibility. Right. So we have to take responsibility for our pain, first of all, and the stories. The stories we tell ourselves. Because it's not that things don't happen. I mean, I know you and I have both experienced betrayal in our life. Betrayal is a really painful thing, and people do stuff. I mean, just people out of their own woundedness do things that are very unconscious that we can feel victimized by. We can feel betrayed by. And when somebody comes to me and they tell me a story that's a story of betrayal, you know, I don't initially go, well, that's just your story, you know. It's like, oh my gosh.
Yeah.
Wow.
Wow.
That is so painful.
And you had said something earlier today that is really, really, really important, in which many targets of narcissistic abuse and, you know, people who have been victimized by this horrific behavior, they also feel like they want to make an excuse, right, for the perpetrator, for the oppressor, and say, like, oh, you know, but they have been wounded too. And it's true, we've all been wounded. But there is a difference between when somebody's doing it on purpose, right? If somebody's doing it in order to manipulate and to subjugate and to play games and to do all of that stuff, versus when it comes from a different place, which is the place of, you know, I want to heal, I'm feeling pain, and I just need to be loved right now.
Yeah, well, absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, people become manipulative and vindictive and all those things out of their core wounds, out of their wounded behavior.
Right.
You know, then they act out from that. But when we experience something painful like a betrayal, it's important first to go into yourself and say, wow, you know, that really hurts. And that's why that's the first thing I do with the client. Wow. Right. You know, wow, that's painful. Wow, right. That really hurts. Because the first thing that people need to do is to be validated. That's a real painful thing. Because it's real. Pain is real. And, you know, we need to validate ourselves, and we need to validate each other. That is a really painful thing. I'm so sorry that happened to you. That's got to be really painful.
Right.
Now, there comes a point in my process working with people in counseling is, okay, now I'm telling you a story about what happened to me. And every time I tell that story to you about what happened to me, I feel the pain again. It re-invokes the pain.
Yes.
And it keeps re-invoking the pain and re-invoking the pain and re-invoking the pain. So there comes a point where I have to say, now what is the story that you're telling yourself? Well, I'm telling myself that that person got a new girlfriend. My boyfriend got a new girlfriend because I wasn't enough. Okay, so how do you feel whenever you tell yourself the story that your boyfriend got a new girlfriend because you weren't enough? Well, it hurts. It hurts because I'm just not good enough.
Right.
And every time I think about him with her, it reminds me that I'm not good enough. And it's like, well, how can you create another story around that?
Right.
You know, the I'm not good enough is your core wound. So that keeps getting triggered and triggered and triggered every time you tell yourself the story that he went off with her because you weren't good enough. Maybe he went off with her because he didn't feel like he was good enough.
Right.
And she didn't, you know, she didn't quite measure up.
Right.
In the way that you did. You know, there could be so many other stories that you could tell yourself.
Right.
But we choose the story that's going to match our core wound.
Right. That's the default.
Yeah.
Right. For me, I remember it was because I did get caught up in that for quite a while, you know, just feeling like, you know, because I was always used to blaming myself for everything. So it's like I did something terrible and therefore he reacted this way, and he did all these things because I somehow deserve it. All of these unconscious thoughts were sort of seeping into my reality. But what changed for me, and that was also through work with a coach, was to look at it as, wow, this event, as painful as it was, freed me from having to endure this, what would likely happen over and over and over and over again, and get even worse.
Right.
So while it was painful, really painful for a while to process through this, in the long run, it's kind of like you're enduring quite a bit of pain for a short time so that in the long run, you can be free. And not just be free of the abuser, but also be free, more importantly, of the pattern. that's within you that makes you so susceptible to being with these kinds of people, so that you can get in touch with that wound. And once the wound gets exposed to light and gets healed, there is no more need to repeat that pattern and to be with these kinds of people. You can now focus on taking your life to the next level.
Absolutely, because what you're talking about is actually self-abuse.
Right.
When we're engaged in self-abuse, we have to attract the abuser. It's kind of like the law of attraction. When we're engaged in self-abusive behaviors, we draw that experience in from the outside, and we draw people that will abuse us because we believe on some level that we deserve to be abused. And so whenever we tell ourselves, or when we continue to tell ourselves, I'm not good enough, I mess up all the time, I'll never get what I want, and you just keep this dialogue going. It's really self-abuse, because we can get into these patterns of treating ourselves worse than anybody else would ever treat us.
And I actually find that is always the case. And the reason why we even get together with these men and women who are so abusive and stay through the abuse, because it's understandable to be enticed and to be intrigued by, whatever tricks and,
tricks of the trade
that they use, right? To lure you in. It's like, wow, suddenly they rock your world, and it's like, whoa, what is this thing? And that's understandable. But when they begin to treat you really bad and abuse and criticize and do the over, and you begin to see through the game, if you stay through that, that's a problem. If you can, because it's gonna hurt, break the cord and say, I'm not gonna deal with this. This is not okay. It's been good to know you. Thank you for all the experiences, but I can't do this to myself, and I cannot enable you in continuing your abuse either. Because the best way we can do, even for them, for the narcissists, for the abusers, is to let them face their own core wounds, so to speak, right?
Not that they ever will, but we're giving them the opportunity.
They're perfect.
Well, and they'll find somebody else that'll put up with it.
They will.
And so we often think that they go on to get somebody what we call better. But really, what happens is they end up going to somebody else that will tolerate what you are no longer willing to tolerate. And that's what you have to realize.
The person that is unconscious to
who they are.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Yes.
And if they do become conscious to who they are, they will either leave or tolerate. Because there's a lot of people that will tolerate abuse. They have a whole lifetime of tolerating abuse.
Right.
So we have to be able to tell ourselves the right story if we want to liberate ourselves.
Absolutely. And we get fixated on she or he looks this way, drives this car, is more successful, is better than me, it's better than me, and that wound just keeps getting deeper.
Yeah.
But what I wanted to also add to the previous point, because I didn't feel like I finished it, was the fact that when you said, it was so brilliant, when you said that we treat ourselves worse than they treat ourselves. And that was the case with me and all my partners, is that when I realized this was such a shock, that because they treated me a little bit better than I treated myself, I made it okay. And looking in the mirror and seeing that how poorly I've treated this little girl, because ultimately this was the wounded child. That's when the wound happens. It's a long time ago. How I treated this little girl for so long and allowed others to do this to me, that was it was all on me in that moment. It was all on me. I didn't know at the time. Now I knew, so I was able to change it. But it's just like you said, if they treat us just a little bit better than the way we abuse ourselves constantly, for some reason we let it slide. So the idea is to upgrade and update your inner dialogue, your inner story, change the story, learn to be kind to yourself. And when you do that, for a while it feels kind of weird, because it's like we've unlearned how to do this, being around the abuser all the time.
Right.
But when you do that for a while, then eventually your tolerance decreases.
Absolutely.
And that is a healthy place to be.
And we were talking about tolerance earlier before this talk. And that is that there's something that people think is spiritual about being tolerant. Right. And it's not spiritual to tolerate bad behavior. It's not spiritual to tolerate abuse. And so when our tolerance goes down for this kind of behavior, that's a good thing. It's a positive thing. So that, and another thing I wanted to say that you touched on about that child is that when we feel that that child is unlovable when we're little, and we feel like that child is unlovable and we feel rejected, we end up cutting off from and rejecting that child.
Right.
Too.
Right.
So when you talk about, well, I treated myself worse than some people, other people treated me, it's because, you know, I saw that in myself. I rejected that child. I abandoned that child.
Right.
She wasn't worth my time because she caused so many problems because she wasn't liked. She wasn't loved. So why was I going to give her the time of day? I was going to cut off, and just like narcissistic people do, you build a false persona.
Yes.
And I mean, we all do that.
Right.
It's our society is made of false personas. We build a false persona that I'm strong, I'm confident, I got it all together. That child is abandoned to the dungeon. We put her in the dungeon. She does not get to come out because she's a troublemaker.
Right.
She's the one that's going to scream and yell and throw a fit.
Right.
And, you know.
Right. And her needs don't matter.
Her needs don't matter. It's like, how dare you have needs, you know? Go away. Get out of here. And so we reject our own inner child. And that's why healing that inner child work is so important too, is we have to bring that beloved little girl or boy out that's been rejected for so long, and start listening and start saying, what is it that you need? How can I support you? And it feels very foreign because, you know, we also have to say, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry that I've rejected you for so long. I'm so sorry that I abandoned you, and I promise I'm never going to do it again.
Yeah.
Because I know now.
Yeah.
I didn't know then.
Right. Right. So we learn to parent ourselves.
Yeah.
So these are, just to recap, these are some really awesome points that you had brought up here about healing your core wounds. So finding a space for yourself, creating a little sanctuary in your life, whether it's going out in nature, whether it is in part of your home, whether it's in your car and driving your car somewhere to someplace, just having that space, that peace, journal nearby, and just sitting with your feelings and asking yourself, what am I feeling right now? And really tuning into that and really listening to that. And what I also found to be very helpful is naming the feeling.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah, that is helpful.
Sometimes like we don't know, and oftentimes like we can feel many feelings at the same time, like despair, sadness, anger. Like I'm feeling it all, right? And giving them attention, it's like it's almost like they come out like these little characters of the shadows, and they say hello, and you learn that they are messengers of your truth, and they're telling you that there's something that needs your attention. And
it may feel more like monsters, but
they're not, right? But it does, because we've shunned them for so long, and we slap fear on top of them, which makes everything bigger, right? Than it really is. And so space, listening, inner child healing, and being aware of the not enough wound, which is so pervasive.
Yeah.
And also you can do I am fill in the blanks, not enough, or I am not pretty enough, not rich enough, not tall enough. There's millions you can choose from, and create a little list for yourself to know what they are and get
to identify your core wounds. I have a healing core wounds class that I teach, and that's one thing I do in the class is let's write it down. Let's fill in the blanks. And, what do you believe about yourself? That's what it really is. What do you believe about yourself?
Right.
And oftentimes that's an eye-opener for people in the class. They've never really done anything like this before. So to be able to say, I feel like I'm not smart enough, I'm not pretty enough, I'm not talented enough, I'm not good enough, I'm not lovable, I'm not, and the list can be very, very, very long, and it's okay. Put them all down. Because as you start working with one of the core wounds, you start healing all of them. It's got a domino effect.
That's so true. That was the case for me. And you showed this to me. This was such an amazing tool. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I also feel like what's really great once you get to the stage of being aware of what they are is to share it with someone who you can really trust. You know, it could be a good friend, could be a coach, could be if you're working with a therapist, because voicing them, it's almost like you realize how ridiculous that belief is. It's like, wait a minute. Or you are able to then bring in the love, right? But just to say it and to see in the reflection of the person that you trust, like, what? You know, like, that makes no sense. Then you begin to see how that belief can begin to crumble. Right. Because it isn't real. It's not true. We are all enough. Yes. That's what, right?
Right, absolutely. And, you know, psychology has shown that the I'm not good enough wound it's kind of a global wound, really. It's not just something that some of us feel. It's something that most of us feel. But I heard somebody say one time that it's our nature to compare how we feel on the inside to how others look on the outside. So if people appear confident, I mean, come on, we all can do confident. We all can put on that front, that show, you know.
Right.
That we can appear confident, but inside feel like we're not enough. We're not measuring up. We're not good enough. And it's typical to compare ourselves, to compare our I'm not good enough wound to how somebody else appears on the outside, and develop a belief that we are the only ones that feel this way.
Right. That is huge. Yes.
So it's helpful to understand that everybody feels that way to some degree.
Yeah.
Because our society puts that on us.
Right.
It's a core shame is a societal wound.
Right. Right.
You know, and of course it comes out in some families more than others, but you know, society is built on dysfunctional families. So if you say, I came from a dysfunctional family, it's like, really? Show me a functional family. I want to see what that looks like. Right. I would really love to see a functional family. Because our society breeds that. I mean, we don't know what it means to be. We're learning. Society is developing. We're growing. You know.
Which is by taking responsibility for your growth right now.
Right.
You are doing such a huge service for the planet.
For the planet, for everyone. And you know, I've even heard it said, and this is a really beautiful thing, that, you know, I wasn't a perfect mother. I'm a mother. I wasn't a perfect mother. My mother wasn't a perfect mother. My mother's mother wasn't a perfect mother. It goes on down the line. But if I can heal that wound in myself, it actually has the power to go back in the genetic line and heal my entire ancestry. Now that's a little metaphysical, and it might be a hard concept to grasp. But if I have conflict in my family and I heal myself, then it's much more likely that conflict in the family will resolve itself on some level.
Yes. So getting through, because that's another thing that people bring up, getting through the discomfort of plucking yourself out of that very toxic dynamic, whether you were the golden child, whether you were the scapegoat, whatever role you had played, it's going to make people feel very uncomfortable because it makes them look at themselves. Right. But if you sustain that and you go your way, sending love back or whatever, however you want to deal with that for yourself, then know that you're also transforming, because it has to transform by default. The pattern has changed.
Right.
And what that is, that's no longer your responsibility because you've done your work. Now you can continue deeper with your healing, but it will have an effect. So I can definitely see that kind of a domino effect of that.
Yeah, absolutely. And you know, you make a good point. When you're in that toxic system, it's easy to be the scapegoat, for example. If you're the scapegoat, you're going to be blamed for stuff because that's the pattern that has been set up. And people need someone to blame. They don't want to look at themselves, so they need someone to blame. And the one that's doing the hardest work often is the scapegoat. The one that's the most aware is often the scapegoat. Because that one that's most aware is often going to speak out.
Yeah.
And say, this doesn't feel right. There's something wrong here.
And that's not allowed.
And that's not allowed.
Because it threatens the whole system. And what it really threatens is unconsciousness.
Yeah.
Because it forces people to, even for a blink of a moment, to wake up. And waking up takes energy. It's a completely different way of being.
It's against the status quo.
Right.
The status quo is stay the same. And even when I was in the, I went through training as a drug and alcohol counselor when I was in my 20s. You know, I went through the program, which was really good for me. I learned a lot.
Yeah.
And part of that was to, you know, sit in 12-step meetings and, you know, go through different courses and classes and things like that. And learning about family dynamics and patterns and everything that dysfunctional families get stuck in. Mm-hmm. And one thing that's always stayed with me is the change back. When you are in a relationship with somebody, whether it's your family or a significant other or a friend, and you start to evolve, you start to heal, you start to change your patterns, you start to get healthy, you start to do things differently, you're going to get the message, change back to who you were. We don't like who you're becoming.
Yes, right. Right.
So you have to be aware enough to realize that.
And also honor yourself to get to be proud of that and use it as a signpost of, oh, I'm doing the right thing.
Right.
I'm on the right track.
Right.
Use that feedback as such. And that, again, comes back to, and this is because one more point that I wanted to bring in here to kind of like seal this topic is something you taught me that was super powerful, and that is reprogramming those core wounds by beginning to tell yourself a completely different story and a completely different message. Yeah. And it may feel almost as if you are getting ready to get on the stage and, do an acting class because, it's like you're learning lines and repeating lines. But after a while, you begin to see that they're actually true and they begin to resonate with you on an energetic level in your body, and you get it viscerally. You're like, oh, actually, I am enough. Yeah, I'm more than enough. Oh my God, I've been working overtime all my life to prove that I am enough, whereas I was already enough, so I'm actually more than enough because I've done all of this extra stuff, right? So
yeah, you have to start developing a new dialogue with yourself. So when first part we talked about is bringing awareness so that you can catch yourself in the things you say. Now, I used to catch myself when I first started becoming aware. Oh, Kaleah, you're so stupid. Mm-hmm. I would say that. Mm-hmm. And then as I started bringing more awareness, it's like, did you hear what you just said?
Right.
It's like, cancel.
Right.
So that's the first thing you do. Cancel. I'm so sorry I said that to you. That's not true.
Yes.
You're smart.
Right.
You're brilliant. You're wonderful. So, you've got to change your self-dialogue. You have to change how you talk to yourself, but you can't change it until you become aware of it. Mm-hmm. Because a lot of the times when we say you're so stupid or you're, what'd you do that for? Just the things that you say unconsciously that you're not aware of, you become aware of. You start to notice these things that you're saying to yourself.
Right.
You get to cancel and you get to start saying good things. Mm. And now me and my inner child, we are good. We are so good. And that came from years and years and years of hard work to where now it's like, oh, sweetie, it's like
nice. I love that. And I started to say, like, good one. We'll try better next time. Yeah. We learn what doesn't work.
Yeah. You start to learn to, if I were to be a mother all over again and have this sweet, innocent, precious child that's just in its formative stages, and I would bring all this knowledge and wisdom to this child, I'm doing that for this child.
Mm. Right.
Right. And hopefully that'll pass down to my son and my grandchildren.
Yes.
And great-grandchildren.
Yes.
Through osmosis.
And now we're passing it on to you.
Yes.
And hopefully you found some great gems that really resonated with you in our little talk here.
Yeah.
And it was really an honor Kaleah.
Oh, it's an honor
speak
to
with
have you here.
And it's fun too.
Yeah,
it's just a lot of
fun.
fun to do this in
great.
person.
Yeah, it is.
And one more question for you is, of course, all the links will be below, but tell us a little bit about your work, your books, your classes, where we can find you, the URL, all that good stuff.
Oh, okay, great. Well, I have 2 websites. Actually, I have 3. I have a music website at kaleah.com. And my name is spelled Kaleah. And I've also got KaleahLaroche.com, which is Laroche. And then I've got narcissismfree.com, which is my work with narcissism. So I've been doing the work in the field of narcissism since really the year 2000, but I really went out into the world more in the year 2006. And so that's an important piece of my work. I'm also a clinical hypnotherapist. I've been a clinical hypnotherapist since 1988. And so I use that in my work to help people to reprogram, to symbolically cut the cords to old relationships, to do soul retrievals, to do a lot of work like that. So I'm excited about that and this new aspect of contacting different aspects of ourself, including the higher self that I do in hypnosis. So I do that. I do different classes online. You just have to kind of go to the website and sign up for my newsletter and find out when I'm having a class. And
Yes.
Yeah.
Wonderful. So again, all the links will be down below. And of course, we invite you into a dialogue with us down below. Write your comments, questions.
Be nice.
Right.
I always say be nice.
Yes, be nice, be supportive, and just I love, when I noticed after I launched my channel, one of the most beautiful things that happened was when I saw someone post a comment when they were in pain or they were struggling with something, and other people ran into rescue. And there were
yes.
there was a string of supportive comments down below. Oh, you've got this, or don't worry, you're not alone, and we're sending you love. And so I was like, oh, that is just amazing,
Yeah.
It really filled my heart. So be nice to each other for sure. We all need all the support we can get, and we're standing together here in the healing of ourselves and our planet, and continuing on the journey towards
Absolutely.
greater love, self-love, love of each other. And peace.
Peace. Yeah. Thank
Bye-bye.
you.